folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. This is a special episode. I am Joe Desiltel, the host, and I'm with my co-host, David Leffler. Hey, David.
Joe, excited to be here as always.
Yeah, so this is a special episode where we're going to try to catch people up on the quorum. This is a minute change of scenario, what's going on here, but we'll try to catch everybody up to what's happening with the Democrats in the quorum break, up to the very minute that we know things that are going on. So it's been a lot. It's hard to even know where to start, right? I mean, do you want to give us the elevator pitch of how we got here and what we're talking about?
Well, so just for context, right, we were recording this at 3:40 p.m. on Wednesday the 11th, so things could change by the time that you hear this potentially. But what we're really hoping to do here today is really kind of explain how the Texas House is still not at a quorum because dozens of Texas Democrats have stayed away either in DC, or some have returned home to Texas, but are refusing to comply to orders to show up to the Capitol. But the number needed for Texas Republicans to have their quorum has been dwindling over the last several days due to several Democratic lawmakers showing up, which was, I think for many people, including some of their peers in the Texas House, a major disappointment. And so I think we're just hoping to really explain how close they are to receiving or to achieving that quorum, as well as calling out some of the folks who have returned there, and also contextualizing why many Texas Democrats are returning home to Texas to raise awareness about significant issues, obviously the COVID spike that's happening across the state, while also trying to receive some or to secure some legal safeguard to ensure that they are not forced and dragged to the Capitol and forced to vote on obviously the some of the most repressive measures that we've seen in Texas.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the bottom line is they do not have a quorum today, and
Yes.
they have, gotten very close. As a matter of fact, they got up to about 95 yesterday, and they need 100 for a quorum. So there's 150 members in the legislature. In the state constitution, that it requires that there be 2/3 of the members present to do any business, which means that if you have 51 people who have decided that they are not going to show up to the Capitol, then no business can get done. And so that is why we are where we are, because after the Democrats walk out, the governor, they obviously went to DC to fight for federal action on voting rights. And fortunately, we're starting to see some progress there. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that prompted the governor to essentially say, hey, I'm going to arrest you guys, drag you back to the Capitol. And to sort of put some teeth into that, just earlier this week, Dade Phelan did issue arrest warrants, civil arrest warrants, which means they're not technically breaking a law. They are simply trying to bring these folks back so that they can pass these bills. And so, but there's been a lot of actions that have taken place in the courtrooms and all over. So we kind of want to walk through some of the things that essentially have happened over the last week, because it's been a lot. So while in DC, the Democrats essentially were able to file a motion for a temporary restraining order in a district court in Austin, Texas, where they essentially got a favorable judge, fortunately, to issue this temporary restraining order, which essentially said that Democrats cannot be arrested. That the executive branch did not have the authority to arrest them. Then, of course, as we expected, the governor appealed to the Supreme Court, where he has actually appointed 4 of the 8 members. And
Right.
so, as we expected, they said, oh, of course you can arrest them, do whatever you want, which he seems to have no problem doing, of course. And so that left things up in the air. That's when Speaker Dade Phelan said, okay, now I have the authority. I'm going to issue these arrest warrants for 52 Democrats. He did that. Many of them are still in DC, but a handful, as you mentioned, had come back. Now there's a lot of discussion about why some of those members came back. I think it's important to let people know that these folks have been gone for basically a month at this point, away from their families in DC, where they didn't expect to be gone. And many of them have small children, and those children haven't been with their parents in almost a month, and they don't understand what's going on. They just know their dad or their mom isn't home. There's a lot of pressure. These folks, this is technically supposed to be a part-time job.
Yeah.
They're clearly working way overtime. This is a part-time job, which just means that they have livelihoods outside of this that they have to tend to, and they are not able to when they're in DC. So not everybody is independently wealthy and can do that. So it's putting a lot of pressure on some of these folks. One in particular, James Tallarico, who himself as a former school teacher, and that's why you don't see a lot of school teachers in the legislature. Hey, we're coming up on September 1st. School's about to go back in. It's a big discussion right now about masks and things like that. But how is a school teacher supposed to be able to serve in a legislature and be in Austin in a classroom at the same time? So this is part of the problem with the way our government is set up. It's set up for the powerful to stay powerful. And that is partially why Democrats are fighting so hard to level the playing field here when it comes to voting rights and some other issues. But there's a handful of folks who came back for different reasons. And the idea behind getting the original temporary restraining order was so that they could come back and not be under the threat of arrest. And what that would allow them to do is obviously tend to their lives, be in their districts, and eventually be back in the Capitol in Austin to work on things that are really important. We have COVID money that the legislature needs to figure out how they want to distribute. There are a lot of other important issues, as a 13th paycheck for teachers that we've been talking about, and these are things that Democrats pushed during the regular session that Republicans did not want to pass. But they put on this agenda specifically so they could say, oh, it looks like Democrats are abandoning teachers and children. Why don't they come back and do their jobs? When they never had any intention of passing these bills at all in the first place. So I think where Democrats have really failed is on the narrative front. We're doing the right thing, but we've completely failed at explaining it to people in a way that they can understand, in a way that they can support. And so, so where we are now is essentially that the TRO, the temporary restraining order that Democrats did receive, was overturned by the governor. And there was a couple days, literally the last day or so, where Democrats are basically like, well, I could be arrested at any moment. The House sergeants are walking around the Capitol as we speak right now, handing out these warrants to the offices to let them know, hey, your member is essentially under arrest, and we need them. And so, and another twist, the latest legal strategy that the Democrats are employing is to get what's called a writ of habeas corpus, which essentially goes all the way back to like English law, right? This is like really the foundation of our modern judicial system, which is that you have to be present if you were accused of something. You have to be brought before a judge in a court, right?
Right.
And so what this is saying is, in a district court, they are basically saying that you can't arrest these people. You can't arrest them. You can't detain them. You can't drag them back to the Capitol. They are free. They have their liberties, and you can't infringe on those. And so that is going to protect them for a few days at the very least. And the attorney general will likely appeal that decision, right? But at least it's not going to go directly to the Supreme Court, and then the next day, just by Abbott appointees, be ruled void. And so that's kind of where we are. It's really just a battle of wits at this point, in terms of delay to keep that voting bill from being passed.
Right. And if this sounds confusing to anyone who's listening to this, trust me, Joe and I are feeling the same way. Like, there are just so many legal hoops and obstacles that not only these people are having to jump through and over, but that keep getting thrown in their way actively, right? We're going from there being warrants issued to then there being a temporary restraining order, to then more warrants being issued after the Supreme Court overrules it, to then now there's habeas corpus, then providing some kind of legal safeguard, although we don't know for how long. But the important thing is that, that as Joe as you pointed out, so far Republican strategy in terms of trying to compel Democrats to return back to Texas basically are lighting the house on fire and then saying, what, you're not even returning home to put it out, like you caused this. When you think about how their policies and ongoing policies have compromised Texans from a COVID perspective, right? That's been one thing that Republicans are saying. You don't care about the COVID surge here, despite the fact that the way the governor has fought back against masks, has not prioritized vaccinations, has actively promoted conspiracy theories like the fact that COVID is surging because of migrants at the border, right?
The border is the most highly vaccinated part of the state because they were hit so early and so hard.
Right.
They had that personal experience it took to say, oh my goodness, my cousin, my aunt, whatever, I need to get vaccinated, and they're doing it. And I'm very proud that that's happening. And you're exactly right. This is a hostage situation. The governor actually vetoed the legislature's staff, and then Democrats sued to say, why are you defunding these 5 agencies? It doesn't even affect the legislators directly. It just defunds their staff and all these other support agencies. 2,000 jobs, state jobs that they defunded. And the Supreme Court ruled in the governor's favor, and he's proud of that. He's like, no, I'm going to keep defunding until you guys show up and let us codify these really bad rules. One of which goes back to another thing you said, which is the COVID fight. One of the bills that the governor wants to codify, one of his executive orders that he's issued that he wants to codify, is that local jurisdictions cannot implement mask mandates or vaccine mandates. So meanwhile, like you said, COVID is ravaging the state. The one thing Abbott has done is appealed to the federal government for more ICU beds because he won't do anything to slow the spread. But so all he wants to do is just get more hospital beds to Texas from other states that are doing what they need to do. So, I mean, it's not really just about voting rights anymore. I mean, this guy is completely out of control, and he needs to be reined in. And at the end of the day, people will tell me, Joe, well, they can only do so much. We're going to lose this fight in the end. They just have the numbers and the time. I mean, I want to, of course, say that they're wrong. We have the people on our side for the most part. But the sad thing is, at the end of the day, we don't have a declared candidate for governor. And so if Abbott, at this point, if he's beat, it's going to be by a crazier, more right-wing, extreme Republican. And so that, to me, is the most concerning out of this whole situation, is like, we're fighting for voting rights and we have nobody to vote for.
Right. And that's a conversation that we're going to have to continue to have over these months until we get any type of clarity on that front, because it has very much been like, well, we're fighting for this institution, which of course is going to outlast any specific candidate, but it gives it a hell of a stronger, more compelling case if you actually have someone who's front and center saying, I stand for this. I personally stand for this now, and I will stand for this when I'm your governor next year. Mm-hmm. So that is something that we need to have resolved sooner rather than later, ideally. But I understand, obviously, the argument from folks like Beto, who's saying, Beto O'Rourke, who's saying that, I need to preserve democracy or help preserve democracy before I can think about my own interests. But at some point, those things need to dovetail. I think it's also important, as you're talking about, folks who are Democratic House members who are returning home to the state, to their districts, and not only saying, hey, I'm here helping my community, but saying, hey, Governor Abbott, I'm here and I'm ready to be able to return to the Capitol to vote on things like COVID relief, to vote on things like aid for schools who need it, things like that. But I'm not here for voting rights. But we need to obviously discern the difference between those folks and folks who have returned to the Capitol, Democrats who returned to the Capitol and are help edging that number towards getting a quorum. So if you can kind of contextualize, I know it's kind of hard to nail down a list of all the Democrats who are currently showing up to the chamber, but just so we can kind of discern the difference between those two kind of cohorts.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, it's almost all border reps who have come back. And so Harold Dutton is an exception. He's a Houston rep, long time. And I think I'd be surprised if he came back to the legislature, to be quite honest. He got a lot of flack this session for pushing forward essentially reviving that trans sports bill in committee. And so I think he's just kind of over this whole thing. It's what it seems like for me. But
Yeah.
so you have Dutton, Art Fierro, you have Herrero, you have Gonzalez M, you have Bobby Guerra, you have Tracy King, you have Lau Larson, who's the lone Republican from San Antonio who voted to not issue arrest warrants.
Yep.
You have because of course there's always a subcontext, right? Like
Yeah.
he's mad at the speaker, he's mad at the governor, he's mad at Dan Patrick, he's mad at the Republican Party over all kinds of stuff. But he is a Republican who is pro Medicaid expansion, and ironically, it takes somebody falling, in a big fight with their own party to even just start speaking common sense.
Right.
And so
Right.
he's saying things that like, holy crap, this guy, this is, what happened to these people? There used to be more people like this, and the state legislature used to be a place where Democrats and Republicans would say, hey, we're going to vote our districts, we're going to come in, we're going to take care of the people's business, we got 140 days and we're going to go home. That's
Yeah.
what a part-time.
Yeah, Larson actually had a good text up yesterday, or sorry, a tweet up yesterday where he said, arresting members to come to the House floor. Have we got to the point where we believe our own bullshit, his words,
Yeah.
so much that we arrest our own colleagues? Civil discourse took a nasty turn today.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's kind of a voice to watch. I think. I hope he comes back because what we've seen, and especially at the national levels, once Republicans start talking like this, it's because they just announced retirement or they're about to, and so that's the sad thing. And so I hope that we can keep some voices like him in the legislature. Eddie Lucio III is on this list also. Oscar Longoria is on this list. Joe Moody, who was previously Speaker Pro Tem.
Mm-hmm.
Who lost that on the first walkout, but here he is. He's back. So he's back, getting the Republicans very close to a quorum. And then there's James Tallarico, who I mentioned earlier, who's a Central Texas young Democrat, but he's in a swing district. And I believe the situation with him, I'm just going to say, is I think he saw some polling that probably scared him, and he felt like he needed to come back. And but the bottom line is like, sometimes things get tough and it's going to be hard and you just have to make decision. You have to make the right decision, and sometimes that means you lose your seat, but the fact is, if you win your seat, or if you make some move and you throw your colleagues under, and what are you coming back for? Because once you come back, they're going to remember that. If you come back, they're not going to be very happy with you. If if they feel like you let them out to hang, and
right. And at a certain point, it's like I get there's always a sense of, or typically a sense of self preservation when it comes to elected officials, and I understand that is a portion of this, and the idea that like I want to return here back to Austin so that I can continue the fights at a later time and not kind of disappear into oblivion or lose my seat or whatever. But one, like to start, this is the biggest fight to date, right? Like at a certain point, if we lose this fight, you have your seat next session. And SB7 is, the voting rights bill is allowed to pass. Like, what will our democracy look like at that point anyway? And also, if they're going for these kind of things now, what do you think you're going to be having to fight in the minority at that point, say in the next session? And also there's just this overall kind of, I don't want to say it's not naivety, but the idea that like, you can return back if you're Tallarico, as he has, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get gerrymandered out of your district anyway.
Absolutely.
Right?
They're not doing you a favor.
There's no allegiance there.
Brian Hughes, the literal author of this bad voting rights bill that they even left to kill, sent his own staff person to run against James Tallarico. Yeah, they're coming for him. They're not saying, oh, well, if you come back, maybe we won't run somebody against you. Maybe we'll protect you. No, they're not saying that. So, the bottom line is, where are all these groups going to be that you need to help you when you leave them? Or do you think they're going to come back and help you? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
There's a coalition of many. The coalition is called Texas for All, but it's groups. Some you probably heard of, some you probably haven't. But it's a long list of grassroots organizations that somebody like Tallarico will have to lean on in a competitive race and hope that they help him. I'll just to name a few: Battleground Texas, Sierra Club, Texas Organizing Project, which is huge, obviously. Planned Parenthood, Texas Equal Access Fund, Texas Freedom Network, Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, United We Dream, Progress Texas. I mean, it just goes on and on. So there's a lot of these groups, and labor's behind this too. Like, hey, now's not the time to get to be weak, right? Because okay, let's say he does lose his seat. Doesn't mean he can't run for something again, because if you lose your seat fighting for what's right and fighting for these people, they will be there for you.
Right.
Look at Beto. People are they still want him to run for something again,
Yeah, I think to your point, if you by compromising here, you're putting yourself in a position where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't at that point, because the Republicans aren't going to have your back, and at this point you've kind of double crossed. Maybe that's a bit extreme, but you've double crossed a lot of your peers who are still compromising their own their own well-being, whether it's in DC or they're dodging a warrant in Texas currently. And as you were just pointing out, like that, if you want to have a future in Texas politics as a Democrat, and you have this stink on you, that's going to be a very difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, to those Republicans there, you still smell like a Democrat. So I don't think they're going to forgive you for the first 20 days you were gone.
Right.
And so this is just, I think, a sort of a snap thing. He posted something on Twitter. It got, like I said, 1,600, I think, retweets, but it had like 5,600 replies. And that's usually a bad sign. That means people have something to say to you, and they're not necessarily trying to amplify your message, but they're disappointed. And so, I hope that because there's no deal that you can cut. Like you said, there's no benefit that you're going to get from them that is going to make it worth doing this. With some of the argument that people are trying to make, is that they think they can make these bills better. But again, it's like, is it going to stink less? I guess, but it still stinks. And so we don't want it, and we shouldn't have it. And so my hope is that, of course, we get some type of federal legislation that comes in that will override this.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there was a case. I'm trying to remember what the exact issue was, but I think it might have been to do with masks. But the point is that the Texas Attorney General ruled today that he isn't sure that the federal law supersedes Greg Abbott's executive order, which is just dumb, because the federal government will always supersede a state order of anything. And so that's why we need this federal legislation, and we're going to keep fighting in the courts. And so we need to be able to stay together. I think, he's probably seeing some of this polling that we talked about as well. So I don't know. Did you want to chime in on that?
Well, just again, as you're pointing out, right? They're saying they want to come back and make these bills better, but the idea of returning to the negotiating table when there hasn't even been, right? Like, if you're thinking about a classic kind of negotiating, the Democrats left, the Republicans haven't conceded anything in their position. They haven't said, okay, if you return, we will do this, this, and this, and then we'll figure out the rest later, right? All they're doing is just trying to play kind of a narrative game and saying, look, these guys aren't here whenever COVID is bad, everything else like that. There hasn't been anything that'll really positively incentivize them coming back, at least from a public perspective. There hasn't been any kind of real movement on the Republican side towards the middle in this case.
Yeah, there's really nothing. And, I'm not super confident in this polling that's been passed around. It says 51% oppose the walkout, 39% support the walkout. I happen to believe that this is a narrative issue, and the Democrats from the beginning didn't have the right narrative when they left. Everything said about fleeing, and that's not what it was. They should have been saying we've been exiled out of the state.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that is more accurate. And then they went to DC specifically to fight for federal voting rights, which we are seeing progress on. And
Right.
so, as a matter of fact, today, I believe it was announced, Steny Hoyer said that on the 23rd of August, I believe, or 24th, they're going to call Congress back. And they're going to, one of the things they want to look at voting on is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And so this is something that they're pushing for, and would hopefully make some of these policy positions moot. So if you want to make the bill better, let's pass federal legislation so they can't undercut you at the Texas House level, because
Right.
what's going to end up happening is they say, yeah, come back and do that 13th paycheck for teachers, come back and let's move around some COVID money. And what's going to happen is they're going to pass this voting bill, and they're going to be like, oh, you know what, actually, don't worry about it, we're done here.
Right. Right. And for context for folks, right? Like, what was it on? It was on Monday that, they had the House chamber locked. They locked the doors, right? And so they're going to take you in there and basically squeeze whatever legislation they can, at least, unless there's a drastic change of strategy from the Republicans, and then wipe their hands clean. And so again, as you're pointing out, the longer they hold out, not only the more momentum that there potentially could be, Jesse Jackson, Reverend William Barber getting arrested in DC, in defense of voting rights just a matter of weeks ago. Like, I think there was a fear after a couple of weeks when the Texas Democrats went up to DC that, this might be fizzling out. But, I think the longer you're there, this is, there are going to be ebbs and flows of attention as the media pays, mind to various topics. But the longer you're there, the more you have a chance not only gain momentum, but also, as you're talking about from a narrative perspective, to help reshape that narrative, right? I mean, they stumbled out of the block in that regard, but the longer you're there, the more opportunities you have to be able to really kind of recraft that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing we should talk about is just, the fact that there has been, in a larger way than before, some reaction from within the Democratic caucus to some of these folks returning back to the Capitol.
Yeah, absolutely. State Representative Ana Marie Ramos was very pointed and called some folks out by name and shared a picture of folks on the floor of the House and be like, "What's up, guys? Why are you there?" Do you have it in front of you?
I have it in front of me. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, please, by all means.
So, do you want me to say who she singled out?
Well, it's public. I believe in the picture. It's James Tallarico, Joe Moody, and Mary Gonzalez of El Paso.
Right. So she tags them. She puts up a photo of all of them kind of huddled together in the Texas House chamber, and she said, "You all threw us under the bus today!" Exclamation point. Why? And so, I mean, I think that just shows that obviously the amount of frustration that really kind of bubbled up within a lot of the Texas Dems who have stayed away. But, I mean, I think it is important to also call out that is a significant development from there being kind of fissures within this. And I think, ideally seeing that and having those kind of internal discussions among the Dems who've stayed away, that will kind of fortify the front in an ideal world. But it certainly shows that, as the Republicans are only 5 away from achieving their quorum, they're concerned that there could be others coming down the pike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely the concern. And I mean, kudos to the team that have kept these guys together. 50 something people from all parts of the state, very diverse caucus, keeping them on the same page and together has been a difficult task, and it's a monumental task. And I know I talk to my father every day, who's a member also, and he's in DC. In fact, a lot of, this lawsuit stuff was, sort of his brainchild in a way. And so, I know how frustrated they can be when they have to work, not only to come up with a strategy, execute on that strategy, but to make sure everybody will follow through. Because it only takes a couple, as we've seen. They're literally 4 human beings, warm bodies away. And we should also note that there were some Republicans missing because they have COVID.
Right.
And so, although they did set up a special COVID room for Republicans so they can go in with COVID and vote from there, so and be present. So they are very determined, but the governor is, you would think, has his hands full. Although I heard he was at a UFC event like last night or the day before, because I had a friend who was there, and I was telling him about this lawsuit, and he goes, "Well, it can't be that worried about it. He was at UFC last night," and I was like, "Okay,
Right.
fine."
Priorities.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, but he's being sued by, school districts all over the state of Texas who are defying his orders. You obviously have the legislature, members of the legislature suing him, defying his orders. It's because he's doing such a terrible job. He has zero leadership skills. He's angry. He's clearly upset. And he's not doing anything that actually benefits the people of Texas. In fact, we're hurting really bad right now. Even if COVID wasn't an issue, we'd be in a little bit of trouble right now with the way he's been leading. But this new surge has put a new light on it, and my hope is that because of all the locals that are suing and then suing over local issues, that will raise this beyond, oh, it's the Democrats and Republicans fighting, to like, wow, this is having an impact on my life and my child's life, and that they really start to pay attention. But again,
Yeah.
it comes down to, will we have somebody to vote for? And right now, so far, we have not heard a name. So I think it's going to be tough. Um, you know, we talked about Matthew McConaughey because his name had been brought up. He was polling ahead of Greg Abbott,
Right.
but I don't see at this point how you could be a viable candidate for governor and have said zero about any of this stuff that's happening. And your state is under the microscope nationally,
Right.
and you can't say anything. So I find that I feel like, I was open to it, but that's closing very fast. He would have to just say something just mind blowing about why he's been so silent.
Which is so strange. Yeah, which is strange because even last year, whenever the pandemic had really first kind of started to hit the state, he was posting videos telling people to mask up and stuff. And now he's been dead silent on that kind of stuff. So not that you deserve an award for telling people to mask up, but like, it's not like, you're right. He hasn't, beyond showing any kind of interest in any kind of policy whatsoever, he hasn't even shown at least publicly, the slightest interest in what's happening to the state right now, which is, we're running out of ICU beds, right? And in the Austin area, where you and I both live, there's, roughly 2.3 million people here. And there's, as of yesterday, at least, there was only 2 ICU beds available. And that's not just, affecting people who are getting COVID and then ending up in the ICU, but that affects people who would normally need an ICU bed, who are then being deprived of it, right? Like that, all it takes is there to be one car wreck that's ghastly enough that 3 people need to get in the ICU. And because there's only 2 beds, one of those aren't going to get it by math, right?
And the governor has already stopped elective surgery. So so people who had surgeries, and they, just because it's elective doesn't mean it's not serious and like really needed. And people have been preparing for these things for months. And because of his lack of leadership, they aren't going to have the surgeries they need. And that puts our health workers at risk because they are tired. It's been a year and something of this. And, they're away from their families because they don't want to infect people, being in a hospital around sick people all day. This is just awful. And I'm just really disappointed in how really Texans in general have not uniformly just blasted this guy and not paid enough attention to what he's been doing. And so hope that changes.
Yeah. Joe, I was going to say, we should, just to bring it kind of full circle. I know before we started recording, you had talked about that there could be some developments coming potentially on the quorum front tomorrow, since the House will be reconvening, right?
Well, the House will reconvene at 4 tomorrow to see if they have a quorum, but my guess is they're not going to get one this week.
Right.
That's my guess, because I feel like they would have already had it. And so I don't see anything that's changed. So I expect there not to be one. I certainly hope they.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, do you have anything else on the quorum front?
Not on the quorum, but we did have some Texans that went to the Olympics to completely change the subject, but to try to end on a positive note. Brought some medals back.
Yeah, we figured, just for the sake of some type of levity that we would that we would at least give a quick shout out to. Some of the I'm not going to go down the whole list, but some of the notable folks either who are Texans or associated with the state of Texas who showed out in Tokyo. I mean, obviously, from a basketball perspective, Kevin Durant, who led the men's team to a rocky road to the finish, but a gold medal. Obviously, Chris Middleton, who plays on the Milwaukee Bucks, went to A&M, so he was on the team as well. You had Kat Osterman, who was a longtime star for the University of Texas. She actually came out of retirement to play in these Olympics. She's a softball player and helped as a pitcher lead the team to a silver medal, which I understand was pretty disappointing because they were hoping to kind of exact vengeance for on Tokyo from the previous Olympics, but impressive nonetheless. You have Brittany Griner on the a star in the WNBA, helped win the gold for the women's basketball team. And then I just think this is a fascinating story. Gabrielle Thomas, or Gabrielle, I might be pronouncing it wrong, won 2 different medals, a silver in the women's 4 by 100 meter relay, and then also a bronze in the women's 200 meter relay. She's a Harvard grad who's actually going to UT now to get her master's in epidemiology. So talk about hitting on the two kind of most pertinent fronts in our lives right now, or at least was, which is the Olympics, and then also epidemiology, which is only going to become that much more important during the age of COVID.
Yeah, sadly, of the two things, only the Olympics are going away. Unfortunately, the COVID has not going away. But I think we should also mention, of course, Simone Biles being from Houston,
right. Of course.
Won so many medals. But there's a future Longhorn, a 17-year-old Lydia Jacoby, who I watched her win the gold medal, and she's going to be headed to Austin to UT this semester. So I feel like it's so funny. It's like you realize how young these people are, because hadn't even started college yet, and she's a gold medalist. So she's going to be starting, hey, new to Austin, don't know where the restrooms are, but she's got a gold medal around her neck. So it's pretty wild. But
really puts your and I's athletic abilities in context, Joe.
yeah. I struggle just stretching. So yeah.
And then also one more quick shout out. Tamira Mensah Stock. She's a wrestler. She's from Katy, Texas. She won the gold. Only the second wrestling gold medal ever for an American woman, and the first by a Black woman here. So that's a big one too.
Definitely. Yeah. And there was, so that's really impressive. We got so much talent here in Texas. It's unbelievable. It's not in government, but it seems to be everywhere else. And so it's our job to sort of flip the script on that and try to bring our government performance up to the performance of these gold medal athletes and really make the rest of the state proud.
And whether that talent is present on this podcast or not, we'll let the audience be the judge. But
yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, with that, thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Hope you found this to be informative. I hope it's actually valid for more than a few hours. Things seem to change so quickly, but if nothing else, this is a point in time to tell you how we got where we are here today. And so we can pick up next time. Maybe while this is going on, we kind of do this periodically, weekly or whatever. But until the next episode, thanks everybody for listening. Find us at texassignal.com and at Texas Signal on Twitter. We're doing really up-to-date stuff there. Always happy to have you join the conversation. And if you'd like, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter, which you can go to texassignal.com. At the very top on the right-hand side, you'll see that you can just click that and essentially become a subscriber for a small amount of money, whatever you choose. That would really help to sustain this type of progressive journalism we do here, and we very much appreciate it. So until next time, thanks so much.
Thanks guys for listening.